So I'm Stephanie. I'm from Medical University as well and from Germany. And before studying medicine, I was just traveling a lot. So good job to you guys for learning German, for learning English. Traveling is a great thing and you will use all the languages in the future. So in this presentation about non-communicable diseases, we're going to talk about a mental health crisis, which is a growing problem in schools and beyond. So let's have a look at some examples of mental health crisis. First, a disclaimer actually. We're talking about non-communicable diseases. So they're obviously diseases, which means anything that you hear in this presentation about mental health, about advices that I might give, they're not coming from a physician. I'm still in third year, I'm not a doctor yet, so if you or anyone else that you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, please do look up a physician and a professional to give you actual medical advice. Now, what are some reasons for mental health crisis? This first picture that you will see here. You might be excluded from a group, feel lonely, lose connection with friends, or just go to a new school, for any one of you who's here. Another example could be putting a lot of pressure on yourself. Maybe you have a big presentation, like me today, can cause a lot of stress, can also be a reason or a trigger for a mental health crisis. Next one. Broken hearts, losing a loved one, having problems with relationships can also be quite stressful. Next one, injuries, for example. We just had a presentation about trauma. If you can't do your sports, if you feel excluded from some of your hobbies, also a huge problem. Here, stress at home, or even with school in general, putting a lot of pressure on yourself, grades, whatnot, and parents who aren't supportive of your efforts, also incredibly stressful. And last but not least, self-image problems. If you don't see your own worth and you have problems with yourself in general, that can also be very stressful and lead to a mental health crisis. So, now these are some triggers. What are some actual examples of mental health crisis? So one that you might know is anxiety. It can be triggered by a lot of self-doubt, fear, and putting too much pressure on yourself. See this poor girl, she has so many thoughts in her head that she can't even get out of it anymore. Another example could be depression, a feeling of lack of motivation, tiredness, and meaninglessness. You might have heard of the fight or flight response. So anxiety is like being in this fight or flight. It's just like you want to run away or you want to fight someone. Depression is a bit of a continuation. So that isn't the whole story. There's fight, flight, and freeze. So depression is the freezing version, just like you can't run away anymore and you can't fight the problem. So then you freeze up and you kind of lose motivation. So these are real triggers. There are even physical responses, and on brain images you can see differences in people with, let's say, a normal brain or people with a disease of depression or anxiety. So how do we see this? It can often lead to self-harm and self-destructive behavior. Examples of these that we then see in the clinics, in psychiatry and where not as doctors, are oftentimes eating disorders, suicide attempts, cutting, or in general self-sabotage, where you're just destroying your own connections, your own health in different ways. There are very different ways that this can go. So who is affected by mental health crisis? So things that people you might know. Your friends might be going through a difficult time. Family, school, all the reasons I listed earlier. You might be quite familiar with them. Classmates who you might not be friends with, who don't have friends in general, or even family members to talk to. Said loneliness is one of the biggest triggers of mental health disorders. Lastly, for teachers, for example, students whose grades have suddenly gotten worse or have generally stopped going to school. This is usually one of the big signs that they are actually struggling a lot. This is a quote from a Bulgarian student, actually, who said, "I feel completely lost in my own thoughts. I am not productive, and I'm very lonely." So that is a summary of how a student who's going through a mental health crisis might feel. And quite stunningly, the data for Bulgaria shows that 11% of students are actually diagnosed with a mental health problem. That means those are the ones that actually come to us doctors and who get a proper diagnosis. So the number of students who might be struggling might be much higher, 11%, that's 1 in 10 people. So it's very significant. Now, what are the signs? Let's look at these three. We have anxiety, depression, self-harm. Anxiety, said the fight or flight. You might be shy in crowds because you're scared, you always want to run away. You don't speak because there's so much going on in your head that you don't even know what to say, what's going to come out of your mouth. And getting defense quickly. I said the fight response, not the flight response. Depression is the freeze. Just like you're in such a bad situation that you can neither fight or flight, so you just stop doing everything. You don't go to your hobbies anymore, you don't enjoy spending time with friends anymore. And from the outside, it might seem careless, just like they're just not paying attention to school anymore. But it's actually quite a difficult disease to deal with. Okay, last, self-harm. If you want to know who's affected, oftentimes they will have scars or be wearing long sleeves in order to hide those scars. Loss of weight, as said, eating disorders is a huge thing, and injuries in general. That's just different ways of self-sabotage. 20%. So, this is quite a high number. Do you want to guess what it is? Don't have to. It's actually the 20% of deaths amongst adolescents, so amongst young people, not amongst old people, are caused by intentional self-harm. So that is second only to accidents, which we just heard. Falling off an e-scooter from tall heights. Accidents, number 1 cause. Intentional self-harm, number 2 cause, 20%. So it's a huge problem in Bulgaria. So the question is, how can we help this problem? So we're here from hygiene and epidemiology, and prevention is the first and most useful thing. Stop your friends and yourself from getting into the situation. Next thing is self-help. So it's already on a downward spiral, but you're still able to help yourself. And thirdly, us professional help, so actual physicians and doctors and psychologists. Let's look at prevention. Step number 1, don't be part of the problem. So understand that people are different, be respectful to be respected, and slightly be thoughtful of your words. I always think of this quote, it's like an African proverb, which says, the axe forgets but the tree remembers. So you might have had presentations about bullying or something, but it really is a huge thing, because whatever you say might deeply influence a person who's going through a mental health crisis, and you won't even remember that you said it. So before saying things, to be thoughtful about your words, there's an acronym which is THINK. Think before you speak. That means, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring, necessary, and kind? If it's not true, not helpful, not interesting or inspiring, not necessary and not kind, it does not need to be said. Secondly, you want to be building strong communities. So you're not being part of the problems, but your friends might still be going through a tough time that wasn't caused by you. That means look after them. Ask your friends how they're doing. Are they having a difficult time with any of the above mentioned or anything else that I didn't mention? Every person is different. Secondly, listen when someone is telling you something. Beautiful. Next one. So I actually come from a background. In my school, we had a presentation similar to this one, where some actual psychologists showed up and were telling us about an organization, how we can help our peers. My organization was called Youth Lifeline, and I used to be a listener there. What that means is that we were taught how to listen non-judgmentally, and we had basically letter contact with people who were going through mental health crisis. So there isn't an organization like that specifically for Bulgaria, which is a shame, I looked it up. But there is a different organization that I'm a part of now, which is called 7 Cups. So if you want to learn how to listen to other peers, learn more about mental health in general, about how to look after it and how to just have tools to not only help your own mental health, but also other mental healths, there's 7 Cups. You can see you want to support others, click now to become a listener today. 7 Cups is an organization where you basically just listen to other people. There are other psychologists on there. It's actually a fairly professional organization. I'm a listener on there. So if you are ever interested, that's where you can give free advice to your peers, which I think is quite inspiring. So we're done with prevention. You're going to look after your communities and maybe even help others. Then what if you're already in a mental health crisis? Then you want to be able to help yourself. First thing is to look after your health. It's like there's a mind-body connection, and step one is to check, have I slept enough, have I eaten enough, and have I moved my body? If those aren't right, like your brain is just not going to work. You got to give your brain the nutrients and the health that it needs. Here, sleep as important as exercise, only easier. It's the foundation. If you don't sleep enough, you're not going to have the same appetite and you're not going to be able to exercise. So sleep is probably one of the most important. Next one is strategies, more specific strategies. So if you're in a mental health crisis at the moment, even a panic attack or whatnot, there are different things that you can go through. Journaling is one of the good ones. Setting personal boundaries with people who might be bad for your mental health, or setting up a crisis plan. So a crisis plan, it's very well structured. It doesn't always have to go this way, but it has some very good things on there. For example, it says, who can I rely on? Who would you ask for help if you are actually in need of help? And more specifically, if you can't think of anyone that moment, I know it's late at night, you're not feeling comfortable calling anyone, there are other exercises you can do. There are breathing and awareness exercises, like breathing in for, I don't know, 4 or 5 seconds, holding your breath and breathing out. It activates your parasympathetic nervous system. Another thing is awareness exercises, naming 2 things that you can feel, 3 things that you can see, and 4 things that you can hear. Just getting back into your body and out of your head. All of these are strategies to deal with present mental health crisis. Not going to solve them, but it can be a help. So last but not least, if you really are in a deep mental health crisis, you do need to ask for help. So that is when this comes in. First, who do you trust most? So you want to go to your parents, friends, teachers and coaches first. Anyone who you trust and who's willing to listen. Then we get to the more serious one, the counselors. For example, my school had school counselors, there are social workers and whatnot. People who can then help you and possibly, if you need, even lead you to professional help. One of the biggest reasons why these 11% of people, 20% of people who die of intentional self-harm are not looking for help is A, shame, and B, because people don't know where to look for help. It's quite difficult to find help when you don't know where it is. So this is where we come in. There's psychologists who provide therapy. There's psychiatrists who are doctors who are actually able to give prescriptions. And in like the worst case scenario, if there's a suicide situation, the hospital, the emergency rooms are actually meant to deal with these kinds of emergencies. So that's like, you can always go there, emergency rooms are open. Finally, emergency hotlines. For Bulgaria, it's 116 111. If you call there, they're able to not only give you advice, it doesn't even have to be a crisis situation, just calling for information is also very possible. Okay, so to summarize, what do we have in common? All of these can be triggers for mental health crisis. All of these are things that we will encounter at some point during our lives, and the question is just how we're going to deal with it. If you deal with it well, you come out stronger. If you deal with it badly, there are quite a few ways to help yourself and others out of it. Thank you very much.